Kill me, I'm here! Kill me!
This is 90 Movies coming at you with my top 10 list of the best war films of all time. Now, obviously, these are just my opinions, so if you disagree, that's perfectly fair. This is what the films that I like the most in the war genre. Now, before I get into the list, I do want to tell you about a movie that I was going to include, but at the last moment, I pulled out of there, and that's Das Boot. It does I think apply to a war film, and if you look at the genre and you really contemplate what it means. It was definitely part of a war that the scenes in the movie took place in, but for whatever reason, it just has never felt like a war film to me. I think of it much more of as a submarine movie, and to me, it doesn't apply to this list because of that. Now, it's interesting because there are a couple of movies on this list that you don't see any battles, and it's much more of the planning side of a war. Them being in here, well, Das Boot doesn't really 100% make sense, but for whatever reason, to me, they feel like war films, whereas Das Boot doesn't. It's much more of feels like more of a thriller, and it does have war elements, certainly, and I can understand some people including it, but I just opted not to. So, without any further ado, let's get to the list. Coming in at number 10 is Enemy at the Gates. I love a good sniper movie. I think the concept of a sniper movie is really, really fascinating. The idea of, you see these moments where people are being killed from afar and are none the wiser that they're even in any peril, and the moment where the sniper is looking through the scope and checking them out, and the emotional toll that must take on somebody to be able to have them in your crosshairs like that and take them out without them having any idea, and you see them as actual people, not combatants, because they're usually in a lot of these scenes they're not in a situation where they're trying to take you out. They're not, they almost seem like they're a passive part there, like they could be just a regular civilian, but that's not the case in a lot of these sniper movies. And there's multiple scenes in Enemy at the Gates that do that I think are really, really fascinating. And then there's this whole other story where you have this aged Russian sniper who's trying to take out your main character, and you have them going at one another, and it's really the moments where they're trying to take one another out is just so awesome. Like the way in which they position themselves to try to ensure that the other sniper can't get them in his crosshairs is just awesome. And the acting in this movie is great. You got Rachel Weisz and Ed Harris and Joseph Fiennes, and to me, it's just a fantastic film. Coming in at number 9 is Conspiracy. Now, this is a movie that a lot of people I don't think have heard of. It's a HBO original film, and it is really fascinating to me. It's based on the actual minutes that have been discovered of the meeting in which a group of Nazi generals and power people came together to really stamp out the actual process of killing the Jews that made that for the final solution to the Jewish problem, as they put it. And it's the film to me is just incredible because you have these characters that you're introduced to, and they all seem like perfectly reasonable people, and people like you or I, but throughout all these tense conversations, they're sitting there and discussing the practicality of how to kill millions of people, and it's so powerful because it really speaks to the way in which the horrific crimes of the Holocaust came to be, and how they were procedural in nature, and yet what ends up happening as a result of what they just hammered out during a lunch on that day is just one of the worst crimes in human history. And this movie has Kenneth Branagh in one of the main roles, and it's really interesting because you usually think of him as kind of like this Shakespearean actor, or he's played role like when he was in Harry Potter, for instance. It's kind of a bumbling almost role, and like much more boisterous. But in this movie, he is the guy who's pushing everything forward. He's the driving force behind the fact that these men are going to come together and decide the fate of these people and how they are going to go about it. It's just such a disturbing film and a fascinating film and a powerful film, and that's why it's on my list. Coming in at number 8 is Downfall. It's a German film, and it is really, really fascinating as well. It's the other one on this list. You don't see any of the actual battle. This movie all takes place inside the Führer bunker. Führer bunker. I think that's how you pronounce Führer. I'm not German, so I'm not 100% sure. But basically, it's the bunker in which Hitler and some of his top officials spent their last days when it seemed like all was lost and they had no choice. They were going to lose World War II, and that their impending doom was all around them, and they hunkered down in this bunker. And throughout the film, you see like Hitler's anger and his lashing out, and yet his unwillingness to accept his situation, and the fact that he is still trying to do these things to take his last shots at the hearts of his enemies, and then eventually there's his acceptance, and his final moments and that of some of his aides. And it's just a very interesting character piece into one of the most despicable people that have ever lived. And it's just another movie that reminds me a lot of Conspiracy, where it's just so fascinating to see how these a representation of how these things happen. Coming in at number 7 is Schindler's List, obviously another Nazi movie, a Spielberg movie, not the only Spielberg movie on this list, and Spielberg fans will probably be able to tell what a movie that's going to be coming up. What can you say about Schindler's List? The reason why this movie, again, the best word I can think of to describe it is powerful. And one of the things about it that comes off as so powerful is like you have all the scenes like where, for instance, where they're bringing out all the Jews in the ghetto, and they're forcing them out, and they're killing all the people that are left behind, and they're going to go and force them into the death camps and the labor camps, and those scenes are very powerful. But for me, the moments that have always stuck with me is the mundane moments of evil. Like you have this scene where they're putting together a building that they're going to store the Jewish people in, and they have the architect who's there, who's telling them that the way that they're building it is wrong, and it's gonna like fall apart, and they need to undo it. And there's the character that just decides to kill her, and it's like has her set down, and he shoots her, and her body like lurches over, and it's like really really hard to watch. And then he is like, yeah, but she's right, tear it down. But he wasn't going to let her speak to him that way, so even though she was 100% right, he had her killed for talking to him that way. And like a moment like that is just so rough. And then you have another scene partway through the movie where there's a character that that one of the Nazi officers decides that he's going to kill, and his gun keeps misfiring, and he tries to kill him over and over again. And just the mental toll that would take on somebody to be in that situation where there is somebody trying to kill you. It's just so horrifying. And just this movie has so many scenes in it that are so powerful and just stick with you. And of course, I mean the scene at the end with Schindler, where he's looking at all the things he has left in his life that he could have sold off to be able to pay for more of his workers to survive. It's just all these scenes just will stick with you, and that's what makes it one of my all-time favorite war movies. Coming in at number 6 is Apocalypse Now, another movie that I'm far from the first person to talk about how great of a film this is. It's just such a fascinating film, and a adventure into the descent in madness. And it's just such a great movie. Visually, it's just astounding. The performances across the board are fantastic. The writing is fascinating. It's just everything about this movie is just completely on the mark. It's a long film, but it doesn't drag for me, at the very least. I will say I personally stay far away from Redux. I think Redux doesn't really add much to the film, and there's moments that really grind the film to a halt. But the original Apocalypse Now that was put out in theaters is my sixth favorite war movie of all time. Coming in at number 5 is Platoon. I remember watching this movie with my dad as a youngster, and probably like 10 or something like that. And this movie just was so powerful. The I keep saying powerful, but it's just such an applicable word here. I mean, I should probably get the source up.com up, but what are you gonna do? The moment where with Willem Dafoe that is on the cover of every release pretty much of this film of all time, where he's running and he's being shot at by the enemy, and where he kind of puts his arm up in the air, it just stuck with me throughout the entirety of my childhood after I saw this movie, and to this day. I think it's one of the best films, war films, because it really gets into like the perspective of the men that were in Vietnam and how they felt. So many of them felt like they weren't there for the right reasons, but they were there, and they had to stick together in order to kind of get through it. But then you had these things that some of the army men were doing to the Vietnamese that were disgusting, and the juxtaposition of your loyalty to your fellow man, but at the same time you're disgusted what some of them are doing. It's just such a fascinating film from in that regard, and just absolutely when the movie ends, when when he's on the helicopter, the emotion in you just is just you feel like your heart's open, exposed, and pounding. Coming in at number 4 is Saving Private Ryan. I mean, for that opening sequence alone, the brutality of it is just so incredible. And I actually was watching a documentary that was talking about that not that long ago, and one of the things I thought was really interesting was they juxtaposed the footage from Saving Private Ryan to the actual war, like the camera footage of what actually happened on that day, such as it exists. And the brutality in Saving Private Ryan is far worse than what you see in the actual footage. But they have all these people who were veterans who were there on that day and felt like Spielberg captured their experience, because it's not about what actually happened, it's about the impact it had on them. And I thought from that perspective, that scene is just masterful. And being that it's Spielberg and the amount of work that he puts into his movies, and especially this and Schindler's List, I believe wholeheartedly that he did that intentional and he did that knowingly. And it's just that sequence is just utter perfection. And then the rest of the film is just amazing as well. Like, you have all these incredible sequences and these characters that you come to love, and what ends up happening to so many of them is just so emotional for you as a film goer. It's just it's an incredible war film, and definitely one that I had to put on this list. Coming in at number 3 is the most recent film on my list, and that is Beasts of No Nation. I thought this movie was incredible, and I was shocked that it didn't get the love at the Oscars that I thought it deserved. I mean, Idris Elba gave one hell of a performance. His charisma in it was just like off the charts. This is a Netflix film, so if you haven't seen it and you have a Netflix account, you can go and watch it now. It's a Netflix original, and it to me, it was incredible. The movie, if you don't know, I'll just go into the story real quick, because I do feel like this is one of the lesser known movies on this list, where basically the story takes place from the perspective of a child who is his family is taken away from him, and he gets indoctrinated into this child army that run by Idris Elba that are at war with the people around him. And the kid at the center of this film gives an incredible performance. And then, like I said, Idris Elba is just electric, and throughout the entire film it's so interesting and so it's just you don't know how to feel, because you have a lot of these moments that are kind of become not cliche, but they're what you expect out of a war movie, where you have these moments of like the crossfire going on or whatever, but you have this extra emotional impact of it being children that are involved in it, and just the effect of that is just so fascinating. And this movie is definitely one that anybody who likes war films should check out. Coming at number 2, I should say, sorry, is The Great Escape. I watched this movie as a kid with my dad as well, and I remember it was actually interesting because we had it on VHS for years before I ever watched it, because I knew it was the two tapes, and it was a long movie, and I never had the time to watch it, and my dad never would let us watch it. And then one day it was just my dad and I at home by ourselves, and I asked him if we could watch it, and him and I watched it. And we were up super late at night, far later than I usually was allowed to, and it was just him and I. I remember being curled up beside him and watching it, and just thinking this movie was incredible. I mean, the story of this film is based on a true story, and basically it revolves around these group of soldiers that were captured by the Nazis, and they're in a camp, and they find it to be their patriotic duty to try to escape in order to force the Nazis to put men on them and therefore take men away from the front line. And these group of gentlemen end up creating, or not creating, but they end up being involved in one of the biggest escapes in war history. And the way in which they do it is incredible. And like the moments where they're outside of the camp are just, your heart's just racing for them, because you know that there's people on the lookout for them everywhere. And then the moments where they're building up to how they get out of there are very dangerous for them. And so there's this movie, when I think of this movie, I think of tension, and I also think of camaraderie, because the relationships between all the characters are really fleshed out and great. And then I also think of defiance. Like, you have that old Steve McQueen scene where he's throwing the ball back in his cell, because he keeps getting busted for any number of crimes within the camp. And just all those things just come to mind. And of course the classic theme that everybody thinks of. Then at number one is Braveheart. Mel Gibson, for all of his many flaws, and obviously the guy is confirmed racist, or at the very least has racist leanings, and I don't know how you could say the things he said without being a racist, but he's not, it doesn't seem like he's a good man, but he's one hell of a filmmaker. And this movie is just incredible. The way in which they shoot the actual battles, and this movie, for the very few of you who don't know, there's not guns or anything. This is like, back in the day where they fought with like swords, and the visual impact of the actual battles. Like, he doesn't pull any punches. Like, things get gory and grisly and horrible and grimy, and this movie is those sequences are so difficult to watch. And then you also have this inspiring aspect of this movie where he, the movie, for those of you who don't know, it tells a story based on a true character, but they actually wildly changed the story. That it's, from everything I've ever seen, it's incredibly inaccurate. The film's awesome anyway, so who cares? Basically, it's the Scottish rising up against the English that are trying to hold them under their thumb, and the way that his defiance throughout the film is just so powerful. And then you have the moment at the end, like the moment where he screams the freedom. Just every time I've ever seen this movie, I've had all the hairs on my arm stand up and had the goosebumps, because it's such an incredible moment in this film. And just, to me, it's my all-time favorite war movie for that scene alone, and then the rest of it is all the cherry on the top of the sundae. Love Braveheart. So those are my top 10 war films of all time. Let me know in the comments below what you think, what movies you think I should have included, what movies you would have excluded. Please hit that like button. It does awesome things for my channel. And subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll know when I put out new videos. Other than that, have yourself a nice day.